Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our third session on heritage as a creative future, to focus more precisely today on the narrative of the garments, the narrative of our clothes, and what they can tell us. And for to do that today, I've got the great pleasure and honor to host. Two fantastic women, Abigail Jubb and Morag Seaton, who are together working on a project, a concept, a company called Worn Workshop. So Abby and Morag, I'm gonna introduce you to our audience, if you don't mind. So Abby is a Wolfson Foundation scholar, and she's doing a PhD on fashion and body, on more precisely the changes between the tailoring and ready to wear in fashion history, and she's also working for companies, designers, craft makers, on the relationship between our emotions and the design and the garments that we are wearing. So you can readjust if I have said something a bit awkward. And Morag Seaton is a designer, she's a practitioner, she's fascinated in abstract tailoring. She's got a fantastic experience in tailoring and pattern making, and she's worked for lots of companies on quite exciting experiences. And as I said, Abby and Morag are here today because they've developed a fantastic project which is called Worn Workshop. They met together a while ago when they were in Glasgow. Although you've not graduated at the same time, you came across each other with this fantastic project that you're going to present to us today. And this project will help us to understand how we connect our garments and clothes to who we are and to the constitution of our personal heritage. Over to you. What is Worn Workshop? Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, thanks, Ode, for that introduction. So just to introduce you to Worn, we are a collaborative organisation that primarily aims to change perspectives on the worth of worn clothes through workshops, storytelling, and product development through design. And really the concept behind Worn is the celebration of wornness as a way of questioning society's apparent need for newness. We all live our lives in clothes, and as a result they can really become part of our stories and share the stories of our changing identities, our memories, our bodies. But in the everyday rush and routine of buying and wearing our clothes, it can be really easy to overlook this and the stories they develop over time as they become worn. So really in response to that, we wanted to develop and deliver a range of projects that record our clothing stories and also prompt people to reveal, rethink and revalue their relationships with their wardrobes. And we do this through our own platforms and through collaborations with industry, heritage and education as well, which we'll tell you more about later.
That's quite interesting because you've started your project during the lockdown. So why have you faced the need to develop this kind of project concept association during such an unprecedented time?
I think, well, for a start, it gave us the opportunity to, because we found ourselves in when we had this extra time to do things like this, and we talked about it for a long time. So yes, the concept of Worn has grown in a digital world, and I mean, Abby and I haven't seen each other in over a year, so it has been quite interesting developing it on this kind of platform. But we've always wanted to bring our collective research and work together. to found Warren, and it started off as a series of Zoom workshops before evolving into a collaborative organisation, really inspired by people's relationships with their wardrobes. So we do now continue to produce workshops as well as storytelling and product design that promote the personal and environmental significance of our clothes, all with the aim of challenging negative fashion cultures through new approaches and in a digital world. But of course, this can be applied elsewhere as well in the real world if we ever get back to that. But yeah, so as this developed, we also started working on commissions for industry, education and heritage institutions, including the Barnett Cline Foundation, the Glasgow School of Art and so on.
Which you will present later on, of course, a little bit more. That's extremely interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about the one workshop experience? How does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of as Morag was saying, our first kind of action was to develop this virtual wardrobe workshop, which was really created in response to the way COVID-19 was changing how people were wearing and thinking about clothes, and the fact that we had time to then develop this project around that. So the workshops are very interactive, they're very participatory, they ask our audiences to consider and share their clothes biographies through a series of activities and conversations, and yeah, they take all different shapes and forms. They can involve a whole different range of practical activities, and we're really developing a whole range of options. But our first workshop was the initial wardrobe workshop, which we're going to sample a little bit of later on, I think, aren't we? So
yeah, and we also conduct interviews as well, talking to people on a more intimate level about their lives through their clothes. So because the interviews really provide us an opportunity to engage with the individual experience of wearers and to document these stories of kind of mundane acts of dressing, memories of dress, and relationships and life experiences through the lens of clothing. Because of course all of our garments can provide an insight to identity and other things like consumer behaviour, gender differences, age, occupational roles, culture, religion, class, wealth and so on. So the storytelling opportunities are endless.
It's really interesting to and that's actually where I think there's a very vibrant point there, that garment can tell stories. That the concept of biography of garment is something that I'm really fascinated about, and as a curator and a fashion historian, I can see the relevance to that. Now, from a personal perspective, it's possibly something that is slightly more difficult to emphasize. So, from your point of view, how can garment tell us so many stories? How can they reveal these memories?
yeah, I mean, I think that the definition of garment stories can be so broad, and that's why we're so attracted to it. And at Warren, we really focus on documenting the individual and personal experience of wearers, but really the stories of our clothes and all of the objects, material objects in our lives in general, don't start with us as owners, as consumers. They start long before that, and they tell more than one story. So the combination of all the story of all garments really begins with a combination of individual stories behind the raw materials used to create them. So that could be the cloth, the thread, the fastenings. And those stories also include the many hidden peoples whose hands they pass through, from fibre farmers right through to retailers. And this all happens before it even ends up in our possession. And, you know, if we buy a second-hand garment, its story will be entwined with those of previous owners, which may be unknown to us, or perhaps have been passed down by family and friends with the garment itself. And beyond that, the story of the clothes we own is far from finished. The next chapter for some could sadly be landfill, but others might be recycled into new garments. They might become treasured charity shop finds or even family heirlooms. And a choice few of them might make it into museum collections, where conservation adds new layers to their story. And we just see each of these exchanges and extensions in a garment's life as kind of collaging another layer into this never-ending story. So for us at Warn, a garment story is really an assembly of places, practices and people. And some of those are familiar, some are invisible, but they're all assembled over time. And through these, we can really communicate this patchwork of different industrial, material, personal, cultural, social chapters. So yeah, we really feel that it's by kind of recording these stories and reflecting upon them that we can learn lessons from clothes. And we can find a way to a more emotionally sustainable and kind of, yeah, environmentally sustainable fashion future. That's really important to us when we think about a garment story.
That's funny because when you're speaking about that, it makes me think about think about all the treasures I've got in my cupboard, which is actually I realize that it's a collection of memories, a collection of histories, and all these stories together are actually my family, my identity. And I've identified, well, I've digged something out for you because I knew that we would speak together about us and about our clothes and about our families. And I found this little pajamas. It's so tiny. It's a newborn pajamas. And do you want me to tell you a little bit about
well,
the story of this piece so
we would,
we can see if it's inspiring for you? So this has been purchased by my mom in 1972 when my eldest brother was born. And as you can see from the little embroideries there, it's really connected to the aesthetic of the time. The color is like pale blue, kind of traditional boys' colors, etc. So it's a little bit less trendy and a bit more timeless in terms of aesthetic. But this has been worn by all the boys in my family, including my own boys. And it's just as if, when they're born, the first contact with their skin is this pajamas. And it's a kind of transmission of the family history, family, and the creation of the family bonds through these pajamas. I thought that maybe that could be a bit inspiring for you. And of course, what would be great is if the members of our audience today could use maybe the chat to post stories of memory garments, as we could call them.
I think, because I think what we tend to do when we talk about memory in relation to our clothes is we ask people to find a garment that reminds you of a memory. So it could be a place, a person, a time in your life, which might seem quite difficult because in some ways all of our clothes have these. But if there's something significant that you can think of, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know, and there's a specific
we lost you there for a second, Morag. So yeah, if there is a garment that's significant to you in terms of memory, we'd love to hear about it in the chat. So please pop that in there.
And we will get back to these comments later on, of course.
So another kind of area that we think about a lot, and I should say thank you for sharing that lovely story.
Absolutely.
Beautiful story, and it just kind of shows you the scope of when we think about a garment and all of the people and the history involved in it. And another kind of theme that's very important to us at Warn is value. And asking people about their most valued garment, and we feel we can really learn a lot in terms of design about from that. And so I'm going to ask Morag what her most valued garment is.
I think it's interesting when you talk about value, because of course there's monetary value in clothing, but I think a lot of the time it's the sentimental stuff, and that's definitely for me. I have this one that I made earlier. No, I'm joking. It's my granny's skirt. Well, it's actually my mum's skirt that my granny made her in the 80s, and it's
well, we've lost her.
The story, I think the snow is not helping us today.
No, but
do you want Abby to
Yeah, I mean, I was going to also invite the audience again, if you have a most valued garment that you want to share, we'd love to hear about that. And particularly, we're always interested in hearing what kind of category of garment people value most. And you know, it might be outerwear, is it a dress, is it, you know, a pair of jeans? Yeah, that would be fascinating too. Hopefully Morag is back
Yeah,
now.
I think you're back with us, Morag. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this skirt?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, I've moved on to mobile data, so hopefully the snow won't stop me now. But just let me know if it doesn't work.
Yeah, we got to sort of the beginning of the story about your skirt, so we'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so it's made from the excess fabric of my dad and my uncle's kilts, which they still have, although I think they've had to have it taken out a few bits since then because this was back in the 80s. And to be honest, it looks quite maidenly. But I love it because it reminds me of my granny and because she made it as well. And it's actually quite well made as well. So I suppose that's where I got that from as well, the whole wanting to make my own clothes. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it.
No, it's gorgeous. And again, just one garment as an access to your personal heritage and your story is yeah, it's a great example.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what everyone else has as their most valued garment, but also what value means to you as well. Because of course it can mean different things to different people, and so on.
What about you, Abby? Do you have a most valued garment or a garment with memory and something to share as well?
Yeah, lots of garments to share in that vein. And one of them, which is particularly relevant, I feel like I'm wearing it a lot at the moment because of COVID and wanting to be comfortable and cozy, is my mum's jumper. I think this is an 80s number, not quite sure. But ever since being about 14 years old, I was desperate to have this jumper and would, you know, steal it for periods of time. And then eventually one day it made its way into my wardrobe permanently. And it's just super cozy. And I think, yeah, over sort of the COVID period, I've been far more interested in the way my clothes feel as opposed to how they look, and wanting to be comfortable and paying attention to kind of being without social expectations around what we should wear for different, you know, contexts. And it makes me feel close to my mum. You know, I haven't seen my mum now for a really long time, so being able to wear a garment and feel close to loved ones, and that's something that comes through again a great deal in our workshops from people's stories. It's the way that clothes help them to feel connected with people and places.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I mean, this emotion, connection, the sense of closeness that you have when you're wearing a garment. Obviously, all of that is related to the notion of memory, personal story, personal biography. So, how would you summarize this approach to objects? Because we can extend that, of course, to our material environment. How would you summarize these concepts that are related to our clothes?
Yeah, I mean, just as you've seen from, and that's a big question, but just as you've seen from our little discussion there, and just looking at, you know, 3 examples of garments, already we can see the scope of conversations we can have and the access those can give us to a whole variety of themes. And really for us, all of our projects at Warn are about kind of taking those stories and thinking through them, you know, in a range of different contexts. And that has led us to slowly build the Warn Archive, which I think Morag's going to tell us a little bit more about.
And I would like to thank our audience for sharing so many beautiful stories in the chat. We will get back to that later on. And obviously, this is adding to the ingredients of this fantastic memory clothing sharing. So what about Warn Archives? I mean, you've now constituting and gathered together this narrative of collections into an archive, a collection. Can you tell us how it works?
Yeah, so all of our projects are documented within and contribute to the Worn Archive, like we said, and it's really an ongoing collection of people's stories and experiences with their clothes. And as mentioned before, these stories cover everything from recollections of past dress to important conversations on sustainability, the powerful ways in which clothing can represent or repress our identities, and of course consumer behaviours as well, and that's just to name a few. So I suppose for us this valuable archive it's a storytelling collection, it's a research resource as well, and a way of sharing the stories of our community. So the clothing conversations, stories, insights we collect inform and inspire our campaigns, publications and events, and we can apply kind of the wider insights from the archive to a variety of different contexts as well, like the project commissions that we do, the collaborations we design and deliver for the fashion industry, heritage, higher education sectors and so on. So it really helps us develop new approaches to research, design, production, communication and education in relation to clothes. So all by reflecting on what clothing means to our community, and most importantly, it celebrates the worth of worn clothes, the clothes that we already own.
And you've developed a specific methodology to do that. I mean, it's not random. Obviously, you've coded. You've developed a methodology to be able to code these stories and classify them and organize them so that they're applied from a design perspective, from an industry perspective, or from a heritage perspective. Can you demonstrate, well, without revealing everything, of course, but how this works?
Yeah, and then also from a personal perspective as well, because of course, like we all mentioned, their memory is such a significant theme that comes up throughout the archive, whether that's stories of heirlooms or hand-me-downs, things that we've stolen or borrowed from people that we love as well. Like this one, this is a petticoat that someone talked about that's gone through 3 generations of our family. And of course, she had this real strong connection to the piece, but also how it was made, the kind of the delicacy of it as well. And I think at this point, when it's sentimental value, often it's things like the signs of wear on a piece that can be seen as endearing, which is quite interesting in contrast to the current kind of unsustainable consumer culture where we throw out a lot of things when they show signs of wear. So I think it's yeah, clothing can act as quite a significant objects in our lives that tell us a lot about our stories and the people around us as well. And I think in our personal context, I suppose we want to ask, how can objects help us access these memories and reflect upon our own heritage?
Yeah, and even just from having another quick look in the chat at all these beautiful stories that people are putting in, you can see that already it's this connection with family, heritage, with place, and just from you thinking about that significant garment, it's a real opportunity for self-reflection, like Morag said. So that's really, you know, memories are really important to us in that respect.
So, and there's memories, but there's also concepts of materiality. I mean, how can I say that when I purchase a garment, this garment will be related to a specific story? Well, I suppose that this comes through the time. And how can you work from this wornness to create newness, if I can speak like that?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think this idea when you buy a new garment, what is it, storyless, you know, is it a blank canvas? And I think the answer there would be no. You know, a garment story has already started pre-purchase. We talked about that earlier when we thought about all of the raw materials, the practices, the people, the places it's already been through, you know, as a textile and then as a garment. And I think really, yeah, when we buy something new, we should ask ourselves, how will we add to those stories as a wearer? You know, how is this garment going to become part of my story? And as you can see on the slide, people often think of buying new clothes to reinvent themselves, and that's what this Worn Archive story is really about. But we can use our worn clothes to reflect upon who we are and our heritage, and to kind of think of every new purchase as adding to that collection of stories in our wardrobe. And perhaps that's a better way to kind of purchase things more environmentally sustainably, but kind of to own them in a more emotionally durable way as well. And I think the other aspect here is that fashion really fetishizes newness. You know, we know that fashion, its definition depends on newness, and that's really challenging for us as consumers. And I think we want to kind of reframe that to see newness as a potential for wornness, as opposed to newness for the sake in it of itself. And objects are always visually communicated to us in industry as perfect, photographed as flawless. You know, they're the ideal, they're new. And we think that's something that industry needs to challenge as well, to kind of get away from this newness as reinventing the self. But yeah, and wornness as evidence of wear can really, you know, tell stories of an object's heritage, as we've already discussed, its changing identity, its owners. And if we thought about that in a museum's context, you know, those stories are incredibly valuable to researchers and to curators, because they help us to get a sense of the past. So how can materiality help us to access past stories and think about our present individual social stories in relation to that, and what can we really learn from those practices of our predecessors and how people used to wear clothes. So yeah, materiality is a great and really, again, broad theme that we deal with.
Yeah, and this resonates really with what was said last month with Sylvie Marot and Alan Scott regarding how we how we designers are inspired by their stories, by history, and how they include that into the garments to create something new. So, I mean, this added value is something that is part of the potential inspiration of the fashion industry, and in that respect, it's also interesting to see how museums will and the heritage sector can include these stories as a way to maybe speak differently about garments.
Mm.
You think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think seeing wornness in a historic garment as an access point to thinking about how we wear clothes today. You know, these aren't just past stories, they have real present validity, and they can help us think about how, you know, how we want to use and wear clothes in the future. And I think that's a great way to look at it from a design perspective.
Yeah. So yeah, it's also how, not only how we wear things, but how we design them, as people working in industry as well. Because I think essentially we need to redesign not only how we make the clothes, but how we communicate them as well, and even just how us as wearers think about them. And I suppose the best point here is, if you're considering adding how to encourage value in the design process in this context, is understanding, well, what is it that people value in their clothes in the first place, or objects, or whatever it is, that whatever context that you're working in. So how can clothing stories and experiences become the starting point of the development process and the design process? So we really want to start with individual stories, seeing wearers not as consumer statistics, but as people with valid and valuable voices from which we can learn and invest these into the design and production processes. So in that sense, it's about bringing the garment story full circle, to the start of the process as well, and learning from these experiences, which is so important.
That's a very interesting way to envisage this garment story cycle, and include the way this garment, this cloth, this object, this artifact will not end its life in an archive, but start another life. You know, it's kind of piling up the stories on top of the materiality and transforming the act of production into weaving the continuity, weaving the stories and interlinking them together to create something which is really rich, you know. And I mean, on the slides, there was beautiful examples of stories to share of a garment existence, of this garment story cycle that you have beautifully demonstrated. Do you want to tell us a bit more about, for example, the jacket here that we've got in front of us? Is it part of what you have collected during the workshops?
Yes,
Yeah.
this one's from one of our wardrobe workshops. So this is one of our participants. And I think we did ask the question about what garments people value. And of course, everyone sees it in different ways. And she talked about this jacket. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Abby, because I think you were the one that asked this question to her.
Yeah, no, just this was the jacket that was talked about, and it was kind of, you know, some people might value a garment for its sentimental value, but in this case the jacket was valued because it was so wearable, it was so easy to wear, it was trans-seasonal, it was really, you know, the pockets were really useful for that person's day-to-day life and really fit with them. And you know, that meant that this jacket was something that they really wanted to wear often, look after, keep, preserve, pass down hopefully in the future. And they saw that as a real investment, not only with the initial purchase, but investment of care into that jacket. And I think, you know, coming back to how do we use this in our design processes, here we have, you know, a sense that this wearer really values trans-seasonality. How can we design clothes that are more trans-seasonal? This wearer really values pockets. How can we think about how we make sure our pockets are placed in an accessible way and useful for our kind of day-to-day lives? It can be a very literal translation of this story from the archive, or we can, you know, think about it more conceptually. I don't know if you want to add a bit more to that, Morag.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting because we have other conversations with people about jackets is one that comes up a lot because it's considered such a durable object and for many different reasons. But I suppose for other people, like Abby says, it's a very practical reason why they don't use things as well. So pockets is something that comes up quite a lot. So another conversation we had that's in the Warren Archive is someone talking about how she couldn't wear a jacket because every time she would put things in the pocket, it would distort the shape of it. So even knowing that as a designer, you can ensure that every time you're making something that you're not causing that, because essentially that's going to stop this garment being worn sustainably for a long period of time just because of something as simply as the way the pocket's made. So that's quite important in a practical sense of how we design and take things from the Warren Archive.
And as a curator, as a textile conservator, it's quite interesting to see all the tears and disformation of a garment due to a specific way of using it, which is not in complete adequation with the way it's been made. So that suddenly the like the transformation and the changes in the garment structure becomes a bearer of new stories.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, well, that's great, and I think it makes a lot of connections. And as I said, I will go back to the chat in a minute. But you've applied your methodology to a series of projects with industry, with education. Is it possible for you to let us know a little bit more what you've been doing so far and what are your projects for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think for us, the interest is in collecting stories, but we don't just want a collection of stories, you know, of worn stories. We want a collection of new stories, and that's where these applications really come in. And we thought we'd just kind of briefly skim through some of our work with our Scottish clients representing. So yeah, I mean, I think Warren's methods apply really well, as we've already touched upon, to a research and heritage context, in which we really ask how can we respond to the stories within archives and collections to create new, contemporary and very topical narratives. So one of the projects we've been doing that kind of with is the Bernard Klein Foundation project we're working on at the moment, which is being commissioned as part of a Heritage Lottery funded and William Grant Foundation funded project that they're working on. And really at the focus of this project is the question, what can we learn from Bernard Klein's creative and cultural legacy today? And just for a bit of context here, Bernard Klein is a Scottish designer working in sort of the working over the 20th century in the Scottish borders. And you can see an example of one of his space-dyed textile yarns on the slide. But yeah, we're developing the project we're developing will offer audiences the opportunity to engage with Bernard Klein's legacy through a series of kind of perspective changing research resources, workshops, and hopefully outcomes that they inspire will continue that conversation. And we're working with higher education students on that, and also heritage audiences. So that's really exciting. And I think it also gets us thinking about the nature of the archive and our archive and how we want to use that when we work with other archives too.
Yeah, and we also work with excuse me, higher education as well. So in that context, so these apply to kind of theoretical and practical learning contexts as well. So we've worked with students in the art history, fashion communication, and design, really asking them to recontextualize concepts to their own and others' personal clothing stories. So talking to them about their own experiences and how they can use that within their work to encourage them to really become change makers in their field, which is so important now more than ever. So at the moment, we're currently working with the Glasgow School of Art, the School of Design, and Sustainability and Action Group. So we're running a workshop for the fashion and textile students, which is a call to action that addresses responsible and inclusive design by asking, why is this required? What can we learn from our own and other people's personal experiences of design? And how can we really take positive action in our own practice? And so, yeah, around this, and we're also doing kind of delivering learning on responsible design through talks and visitor lecturing to show students how they can develop new ideas through worn clothes and insights from the worn archive as well. So that's exciting to work on with them.
Yeah, it's great to kind of be able to inspire, you know, the kind of designers or kind of emerging designers and thinkers as well. It's a great thing to be able to do. And in terms of sort of more in an industry context, unfortunately, we can't give kind of specific client examples here as our work's ongoing, and that's all kind of under NDA. But we really can, well, what we can tell you about is what our thinking is in this context, and we feel what better starting place is there for creating new clothes with longevity than looking into the wardrobes of wearers and learning lessons from those that they already love. So, you know, from this we use the stories of clothes to design a more environmentally sustainable and hopefully emotionally durable fashion future. And we do that by developing very targeted consumer research workshops. We don't really like the word consumer, we prefer wearer, so I'll use that. But you know, those are for brands so that they can learn lessons from their wearers' clothes and get really really in-depth feedback from them. So often we see wearers as a statistic, you know, and that translates into trends. But what do people really want and value? We also offer consultancy and story-led product development through research, design, and production, kind of working cross-functionally. How can we embed these stories, you know, throughout all of those different processes? And our plan, ideally, hopefully soon for the future, is to slowly develop our own products, our own kind of very limited product ranges in response to stories that we've collected from the Worn Archive, like those that we shared from you, where we've really been able to address, you know, a whole range of kind of challenges within the industry that we want to put out solutions to, hopefully.
Well, this is really fascinating, and we are really looking forward to see the next steps of your adventure. And of course, we can invite our audience to follow your steps by looking at your website and following up from this webinar. there was an enthusiasm about Bernard Klein in the chat, which is fantastic, and it makes me think that next month we're gonna have a discussion with Alison Harley as part of this series of webinars. Where so Alison Harley is the chair of the Bernard Klein Foundation, and with her we're gonna not only speak about Bernard Klein himself, but about how to curate the narratives that we collect from our material environment. So this is the prospective or retrospective aspect. So you are the prospective, and we're going to go into the retrospective aspect of the collection of narratives. Well, that was really full of inspirations and full of fantastic ideas and visual ways to engage with our garments. And I can see now that Abby and Morag, it's time to wrap up. As a conclusion to our discussion, how would you envisage going back to the topic of our series of webinars? How do you envisage the heritage as a creative future? If I had one question to ask, and thanks to your experience at one workshop, how would you envisage this interaction between the heritage and the creative industries, and how this would inspire a new way to engage with our material environment?
I think that
that's a wide question for a 1 minute wrap up.
No, I was just gonna jump in and say, you know, for us, heritage is about stories. Yeah, it's about past stories, present stories, future stories. Yeah, so as you probably realized by now, everything we do at Warn really starts with storytelling. And whether that's collecting stories or engaging people with these stories or using them to design new products, stories are always our source of information and inspiration from which we can develop kind of new incarnations of these worn clothes. So we really see, in response to the questions how it links to the webinar, Worn is a collection of narratives and a narrative of collections. I don't know if Morag, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because clothes are the artifacts of our personal heritage as well, and objects that can kind of over the passing of time become portals to our past day-to-day lives that detail our everyday moments and memories. And when we learn to see them in this way, we treat them with more significance, resulting in more emotionally durable and environmentally sustainable relationships with our things, with our personal heritage. And I think it's kind of the collective responsibility of us all working in the different contexts, whether you're just a wearer or you're working in industry or heritage or education, to change your perspectives on the worth of worn things by investigating their heritage, the insights we can gain from the stories of old objects, into how we research, design, produce and communicate new narratives, and most importantly to encourage people to find value, to find joy in their material things. And that's really important in a heritage context, but also just for a more sustainable fashion future as well. Yeah, absolutely,
we need to keep an eye into the future of the creative industries and address the current changes of our our world and our society by looking at the design process slightly differently. Can I invite our audience to ask questions in the chat, or do you want to react to some of the comments that were made before we say a definite cheerio?
Yeah, definitely. We're just catching up.
Are there any question that our audience would like to ask our fantastic panelists today?
And while we're waiting for that, there's some gorgeous stories it looks by things. I can see someone talking about 2 Bernard Klein dresses.
Yes,
so by all means, do get in touch with us if you want to contribute your stories. We'd love to hear more about the garments that you value and so on. So I think our contact details were there, so we'd love to hear more. Are you looking
So,
to develop museum displays or a book as well as your website? We do have plans for exhibitions actually. Um, yeah, one of the projects that actually Warren started one was a book that I made when I was a student called Garment Stories, and it was all these illustrations of people and their clothes, the clothes that they valued most. So I imagine at some point we'd like to do maybe something a bit like this again. I haven't spoke to Abby about this, but hopefully she'll be okay with that.
I think the plan is for our 1 year anniversary, maybe we will have a zine of stories.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for that. It's the rough plan. It's been a busy year.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, yeah, definitely. And I think not just museum displays, but also online exhibitions. We're always thinking about how different ways we can communicate these stories and how we can have the broadest reach. And really, we see our social media pages almost as an exhibition of stories in a respect. So yeah, but that's a great question.
And it's going to ask the question of the curation of these stories, obviously, which is potentially another way of thinking the biography of garments. And I'm sure as well that the Bernard Klein Foundation and artisanal next month will be delighted to get your input. I can see that there's a lot of Bernard Klein collections or collectioners or aficionados in the chat, so please join, and this will lead towards very interesting discussions, I'm sure. Right, so I see comments, and I would like to, on behalf of Abby and Morag, to thank you very much for these comments. If there's a last question, we are happy to look at it. And if not, then I'm gonna say thank you very much indeed for joining us for this fantastic and inspiring talk. You're both extremely articulate in your way to engage with the material culture, and this is something which is really enjoyable. I think that you're reflecting the necessary changes of the fashion industry and how these creative industries can and are getting more and more close to their users by looking at the wider spectrum, at the context of who we are and how our societies are working. And I think it's going to be a fantastic experience to be with you today and have a little bit of insight into the methodology that you're using to make us closer to our garments.
Thank you for having us. We really enjoyed
Thanks
it.
so much, and thank you for all of those stories in the chat. I can't wait to really sit down and properly have a good read through them, and I'm sure they will make it into the archive in some way or another. Please send them to us and get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, and see you on the 11th of March for the 4th session of Heritage as a Creative Future. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Here.